Good morning, everyone. Welcome to VMDO Virtual Networking Breakfasts. My name's Katie Stewart. I'm the General Manager at the Victorian Music Development Office, which you'll also know as the VMDO. So what we do at the VMDO, we work to support the Victorian music industry in a variety of different ways. We run events like networking breakfasts. We offer professional development opportunities and workshops. We support research projects and ultimately we aim to connect the Victorian music industry with key contacts and innovative ideas. So we've been hosting networking breakfasts for the past 18 months now. We started in December 2018 at the White Sky Hub in Collingwood, and in March this year we took the event online. So this will be our 7th virtual networking breakfast. So today's talk is NZ-led, and we'll be hearing from a panel of key music industry players in New Zealand about their road to recovery in the current pandemic. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of which I'm on today, of the East Kulin Nation. And I'd also like to acknowledge the many nations throughout Australia and Aotearoa that we're gathering on today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and acknowledge all First Peoples present with us online today. Thank you for being here. So I hope you all enjoyed the networking sessions. We'll have another opportunity to go back into those same groups at the end of the talk today if you'd like to. And you can continue your conversations and have a chance to connect with others in the music industry. So throughout the presentation today, if a question comes to mind, you can type them directly into the chat function and the panel will either answer them as they go or they may wait until the end and address them in the final discussion if it's more appropriate for the conversation. So today's panel is NZ-led and our panellists this week are going to give us an insight into the current state of play for the music industry in New Zealand. So I'll quickly introduce everyone before handing it over to Alastair Burns, who's going to moderate the conversation today. So our first panellist is Teresa Patterson. Teresa is chairperson of the NZ Music Managers Forum, and she's also co-owner and promoter of the Milk and Honey Festival, which is an annual female-focused festival celebrating International Women's Day. We're also joined by Cath Andersen, Chief Executive of NZ Music Commission, which is a government-funded arts agency that undertakes projects in New Zealand and abroad to assist contemporary popular NZ music businesses. We also have Mark Kneebone with us today, who is the co-head of promotions at Live Nation Australasia. And within that role, Mark leads the Live Nation music promoters across Australia and New Zealand to deliver the best talent for audiences. And he also runs the New Zealand Live Nation office. I'm going to hand over to our moderator now, who is Alastair Burns. Alastair is the director of Heartstop Music, which is a Melbourne-based artist management company that represents Marlon Williams, Julia Jacqueline, The Weather Station, Merck, and Fantastic Furniture. Alastair is also a board member for the Association of Artist Managers, which you'll also know as the AAM. So handing it over to you all now to start the panel.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for being here today. Looking forward to having a chat about everything that's going on in New Zealand. One of the things by just, I guess, giving a little rundown of the kind of early stages of what happened in New Zealand, and then talk to Cath, Teresa, and Mark about how they responded to that. So it was quite interesting going back and just looking at the run of dates. There was this amazing rundown on the Radio New Zealand website that said on March 11th, the WHO declared a global pandemic, and then between March 16th, when the New Zealand government required everyone to go into self-quarantine for the first time when they entered the country, it moved to indoor gatherings, reducing 100 people on the 19th. And then by the 21st, there was an alert system and it moved to level 2, which limited travel and mass gatherings and encouraged everyone to work from home. And then by the 25th, there was a state of emergency. And at midnight on the 25th, it was a full lockdown. So between that 16th, that kind of first step, and the 25th, that moved into a complete lockdown, and the entire country was could not leave their house suddenly. And so I guess to start with, say, Teresa, just how was that experience for you as an industry, and how did everyone respond in that kind of very brief period of effectively sort of like 14 days between the global pandemic being declared and a full lockdown?
Yeah, it was quite full on, and interesting enough, feels like it was a million years ago, when in fact it was only just a few months ago. And I guess the first stage of the industry sort of getting together and starting discussions was around when the mass gatherings were reduced. Initially they were reduced to 500. And then within a matter of days, they were reduced to 100. And that's when I think a lot of the industry began to realised that their livelihoods were being affected, because we could no longer put on gigs or do festivals. And we actually gathered together and met like 3 times a week initially, all of the heads of the different music agencies, Recorded Music New Zealand, APRA, AMCOS, Music Commission, MMF, IMNZ, Music Helps, Universal. And we would meet 3 times a week and just talk through what was happening and solutions and how to respond, and what was happening at the government and lobbying, etc. So yeah, that was our initial response.
Cath, how did you sort of experience that very brief period of time?
It was the longest march in the history of the world. It just seemed to keep going and going, but everything sort of happened very, very fast. So we had a lot of artists travelling to South by Southwest. Like, I know there were a lot of Australians going as well. And so once that was cancelled on the 6th of March, everything started feeling very real, and that we had to move quite quickly. And I think in the first instance, the Music Commission response was helping people get home, our artists travelling overseas, and then looking at how much information we could get up to the government as quickly as humanly possible. So the first really big paper I did went up on Sunday, the 15th of March. And that was, a very extensive sort of forecast impact report, what are the most urgent things that the sector needed straight away, looked at what was happening around the world, and different responses from different governments and different city jurisdictions. And that was actually really key to the entire music industry response, and the way it's kind of played out for us in a government sense, is getting that really clear information up as soon as possible, and making sure that they've got a good basis for making decisions. So I think those kind of forecast impacts, getting that in halfway through March, put us in a good place. We looked at what the immediate impact was in 0 to 30 days. We looked at the 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, and then out long term as well, when you're looking at sort of long term reduced revenues from rights organisations and things like that. So we started very hard with venues, record stores and artists, and it kind of grew from there.
Do you feel like at this point those initial predictions are ringing true, or we'll obviously get into where it's at now later, but do you feel like you kind of were on point in those initial sort of projections?
Yeah, I think the lockdown situation in New Zealand was very fast, and it occurred in a matter of days, but looking at who's going to be impacted in the first 30 days, it was becoming really obvious, and that touring and venues not being able to open, every day you're not open is a day closer to not being able to open again. So that was a really key thing for us. I think some of the things we thought would be worse than what we were, what they've turned out to be, is due to some of the all of the country government response. So our wage subsidy was announced on the 17th of March, and artists were included in that. That was part of our initial paper, is making sure that the wage subsidy did have provisions for artists and sole traders and all New Zealand music businesses. And that was being paid out within 4 days. So that's helped stymie some of the issues that might have happened. But I mean, it's a short-term solution, and it's not something that can go forever. So yeah, we're looking at those other issues now as well.
Mark, you're in a good sort of game for dramatic stories, promoting some of the biggest tours that come to New Zealand and a lot of the biggest local ones. Like, what were some of your experiences?
We had a surreal situation where we had a festival on the 14th of March in downtown Auckland on the wharf, a festival we've been trying to get up for 2.5 years. So we kind of had the very strange sensation that the show went ahead, and it was basically the last show that was in New Zealand. And it was best described as felt like on the day that was the last helicopter out of Saigon. And it was like this great, and the show went really well, and we're really happy, and it kind of set it up for its own little future there. But it was surreal walking around and being face to face with all our supplier partners and everything, and kind of getting to talk to them firsthand, and just sitting down with PA companies and lighting companies and venues and all having lunch together, and them going, well, you know, we don't know what's going to happen. And so it was a very immediate kind of reaction there, talking to everyone, agents, etc. But we had a slightly longer run-in because a lot of our events for Live Nation in Asia had already been cancelled, like as early as early in mid-February. We worked very closely with our Asian promoter team, which is based all through the region. So we've been getting the feedback on what had been pulled down, what agents had been saying. We'd already had insurance claims in for a bunch of shows through February into March. So I guess we were slightly more prepared. I guess, I don't know if prepared is the word, but more aware of what was coming. Because we were getting the first-hand feedback from what was happening in KL, Singapore, etc. So, but yeah, the main thing in New Zealand was really just the shock of, you know, the surprise and shock to the supply chain, you know, production, crew, you know, media, all of that. It happened so quickly, and really just trying to offer some support and some guidance, you know, for everyone, and trying to take some as well along the way.
You would have had such a direct line to a lot of the people that are affected in the industry in those roles, like crew and production suppliers, and, you know, a lot of the people that have sort of a day-to-day role in the industry. Did you get a sense of what in those initial stages helped them, or what they were sort of crying out for? Like, you know, were you talking to them and they're saying, oh, thankfully the wage subsidies there, so I'm okay for the minute? Like, what were your real kind of conversations?
Kind of the key one for us and Australia as well, and anyone in the Southern Hemisphere, the biggest kind of the only fortunate silver lining that came out of this was that it was at the end of summer, and most 80%, 85% big outdoor shows had already happened. If this had happened at, you know, in October or November, it would be a very, very different landscape that we're operating in. So a lot of those suppliers had made and finished and kind of invoiced and been paid for most of the work that they were bidding on for that summer. So for crewing companies, staging, all of that kind of stuff, and promoters, and for a lot of the artists, they had the money in the bank. So that's given us a very unique advantage over people like the States and festivals, etc. in Europe. There are very few cancellations, immediate cancellations in this part of the world. So that was a huge advantage. And then that wage subsidy, both Australia and New Zealand kicking in right away, gave a lot of support as well. So if you could use the word fortunate, we were in that circumstance. And that, I truly believe, is like one of the main reasons I think we'll actually get through this, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting when it's something that is just pure chance, which I certainly experienced as a manager, that, yeah, we got lucky with some timing with touring, and it's just pure luck. Obviously the lockdown then rolled all through to the end of April, and so what sort of shifted from that initial kind of shock of that, and then how did sort of April look as that became kind of a new reality? Like, going back to you, Teresa, how did that kind of settle in once everyone had adjusted to the fact that they were now going to be in this sort of new setup for an unknown period?
That was the main thing, was that we just didn't know how long we were going to be at level 4. And I feel like everyone in the nation tuned into the 1 o'clock updates as to where we were at within the country, with how many cases we had of COVID, how many new cases, how many people were recovering. And then like, we just continued our meetings every 3 days. And I guess the main focus, and Cath can talk way more expertly on this, was around lobbying the government. And also both Cath and I are on the board of Music Helps, and we went from having quarterly board meetings to weekly board meetings, and setting up Music Helps Live to start gathering donations to then be able to support the industry. Because, you know, what Mark says is true around the summer had been finished, but still, you know, a lot of those production companies and crew, etc., do rely on winter work, like corporate work, etc., to help pay their rent and their bills. There was a lot of lobbying around trying to get rent relief, and direct lobbying to landlords to see if they were able, you know, to give rent relief. So yeah, that was really kind of the main focus, was trying to see who was suffering during lockdown and lobbying to the government to, and yeah, Music Helps Live.
It was interesting that I think last week there was the first direct conversation with Scott Morrison in Australia, and obviously Jacinda Ardern is the arts minister as well, and so she's more directly connected to the music industry in that role. But when we look at the fact that it's June, and that was the first conversation with the Australian Prime Minister. In the Australian context, like Cath, how long did it take before the first conversations happened with the Prime Minister in New Zealand?
The Prime Minister was giving the information we were feeding right from that first 15th March paper. The Ministry for Culture and Heritage in New Zealand, which is our government entity, which funds all the different arts organisations around the country, they were very fast in their response as well. So from about, I think it was the 16th or the 17th, the Monday or the Tuesday of that week in March, MCH, sorry, we're full of acronyms in government, Ministry for Culture and Heritage, MCH, they were feeding dashboard reports on a twice weekly basis up to the minister. Now, we don't have one arts minister in New Zealand. We're in a quite unique situation where we have 4 arts ministers. So the Prime Minister is the Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage. Our Finance Minister, Minister Grant Robertson, is an Associate Minister for Arts, Culture and Heritage. We also have the Associate Minister, Carmel Sepuloni, and then we have a Minister of Broadcasting, who's Chris Barfoy. So we have 4 cabinet members, so 4 of the highest ranking members of Parliament in New Zealand are related to arts funding and arts support. So we were very fortunate in that case that was happening. But I think we did see in Australia that some things were very fast, like the work that the LPA did for writing to government about preventing the final curtain for arts industries. Paul Fletcher, you know, he made a very impassioned plea for support of the arts, and we were feeding that straight up to our ministers as well. So I think we were fortunate that we have a range of ministers, because they were so busy. They were doing everything sort of on the fly, making up how you run a country when you're in lockdown with no sort of blueprint for it. So having a range of people we could talk to was really useful. One of the other things that the Ministry of Culture and Heritage did is between all of their agencies, so that's everyone from the National Museum, our version of the Australia Council, which is called Creative New Zealand, Music Commission, New Zealand On Air, the New Zealand Film Commission, Antarctic Heritage Trust. So there's a big broad range of us, and the performing arts organisations, the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra, Royal New Zealand Ballet, etc. So MCH gathered up all of us and got us to nominate to go into these subgroups, these sub-working groups that were in 5 different areas of the arts and culture sector. So there was an arts group, a heritage group, Mataranga Māori group, broadcasting group, and screen and sound. And our job on those subgroups was to distill down what are the key things that ministers need to know and action needs to happen on fast. So I I actually ended up on 2 of those subgroups because some music spans them, and I was both on the arts and the screen and sound group, and we were using that as kind of a tool for getting broader information up to government, and then we were also doing all of our own very specific contemporary music information going to government. So we were kind of working a lot of different angles. And because I was involved with so many different parts of the government response, that meant that I met with Minister Cepoloni 3 times over April, which is a pretty unusual thing. Normally we'd meet with the Minister once every 6 months. So, 3 times in a month shows that they were looking at an extraordinary response.
Yeah. And I guess Mark, for you over that April period, did things shift in a big way, or was it sort of having to just like sit and wait until you had news?
We had the unfortunate task that we had to pull down a ton of tours, not just immediately for April, but we had a number of arena theatre tours, outdoor shows that had to be taken down, moved, rescheduled, cancelled. So that took and still is a huge amount of work. And then all the stuff that comes with it, what happens to the artists, what happens with the money, insurance, all that kind of stuff. So that kind of took up like a lot of March and April. But then by about mid-April, we'd kind of moved to a footing on what's the industry going to look like in the second half of the year? What does social distance shows look like? Proactively, what can we do to start helping our suppliers? We took the attitude, which pretty much the entire industry in New Zealand took, that if the supply chain breaks, we're all stuffed. Like if there's no one to do the staging, then there's no shows this summer. So everyone, it was really good to see. Everyone did come together and was really trying to find ways for everyone to come through. So that took up a lot of time, and there were a lot of conversations going on in different ways amongst the festivals, etc., all that kind of stuff as well. But by April, we were well into what do shows look like with 100 people, 150 people. So when those restrictions did get lifted, we were able to announce kind of right away, which is really key.
How was the consumer experience in terms of postponed shows and dealing with customers, probably with a lot of different perspectives in terms of what should happen to the money with the tickets and getting refunds, and you must have been quite hands-on with a lot of that.
It was really hard in the sense that the New Zealand law is not clear on refund policies and periods. So we spent a lot of time engaging with an organisation called the New Zealand Commerce Commission, which is very similar to the ACCC, and trying to get some clarity around, firstly, when the major ticketing and promoters come together, they need permission to speak about commercial matters for obvious reasons. So we had to sort that bit out first, and then ask for guidance around refund policies, etc., because the laws basically do not mention it. So that's a process we're still going through. Most people were really understanding, but in most cases were given refunds straight away. Disappointingly, there were some people tried to delay and have still trying to delay giving refunds on events by moving them to the next year and not giving refunds. Thankfully, the Commerce Commission is now doing their job and basically pursuing them, which is exactly, in my opinion, what should be happening. Because as an industry, I don't think we can morally take $90 off someone and tell them I'm not doing the show, but come back next year and maybe your $90 will be worth the same amount then. So curious to see what happens then. But and I raise that because I think no doubt some of you guys have discussed amongst yourselves as well, is that we're all in this together, and the actions of a few affect all of us. So how we treat our customers and how we treat our crew and how we treat our venues reflects on all of us. So hopefully we can move to a position where everyone's getting a refund whenever they want.
So for those that haven't been following the trajectory in New Zealand, that level 4 lockdown ended on April 28th, and then it moved to level 2 on the 14th of May, and then on June 8th, things were completely opened up again with restrictions on work, school, sports, domestic travel, and gathering size lifted for the first time since mid-March. And then as of Monday, there were sort of 1,500 probable cases, 22 deaths, and there's been a few new cases with people coming back into the country Many would have heard of two people coming back from the UK, making their way through the country, and causing a bit of a fright. So yeah, after everything that's happened, and now that everything's sort of easing back and plans are being made, kind of what's the sort of the current landscape? I guess it'd be good to sort of talk through the different areas of the industry, but yeah, Teresa, starting with you, like what's sort of the current landscape as it sits, and where is kind of New Zealand placed at this point?
People are starting to gig, and gigs are happening. Everyone here is been to gigs, which has been great to get out there and start seeing live music again. I know that there are discussions around festivals that are happening over summer and booking New Zealand artists, because even though we are now at level 1, it's still very much domestic looking. The borders are not open. I don't know actually when the borders will open again, or even when the Trans-Tasman bubble that had been talked about will start. I mean, you in Melbourne must be so disappointed that you were expecting to open this week, and now you've gone back kind of into your version of lockdown. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of planning. There's a lot of planning going on over the next 6 months, which I'm sure Mark actually can talk to way more expertly than me around what's happening in the festival world.
Yeah, jumping you, Mark, like yeah, what's the sort of the current picture for you guys?
Incredibly positive, all things considered. There's no way that even 6 weeks ago we thought we'd be anywhere near where we are now. As quickly as we went in, we seem to have come out, which is fantastic. We have no limits on shows in terms of capacity. You know, I've been to shows every weekend for the last few weekends. I actually bumped into Cath at a gig at a dive bar last Thursday after having my first drink in 7 months. So my apologies on that, Cath. You probably saw me at full steam there. But you know,
one drink, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. That's all. It's easy that way now. Look, we put a Benny Arena tour up on sale yesterday, and we're adding dates. You know, after one pre-sale, LAB have sold out half an arena. There are festivals going up. So I think we're in a really positive surge as people are coming out of lockdown. They want to go out. They want to do things. We have a couple of other big tours we're announcing in the next couple of weeks that I think will be a much better bellwether for what the appetite of the market's going to be. One of them's aimed at a much older audience, and one of them's aimed at a much younger audience. Where everything we've done so far is like 18 to 35, which is basically people who have their own money, don't need permission to go out, and like going out with their friends. So of course they're going to react really strongly, but what's happened either side of that is going to be kind of the real test to see how that goes. And I see in Europe they're opening up some stuff, and with the LN Global call this morning, we're talking about how they've seen real resistance to anything kind of 40 plus going on sale, as that older demographic far more reluctant to go out. So we'll see if they can look at it here.
And Cath, yeah, what's your sort of take? Obviously, you're so involved in all the government conversations and across the funding bodies. Like, how is it looking in terms of the specifics of the sort of behind the scenes?
It's still an evolving situation. But I mean, one of the things that we have in May every year in New Zealand is New Zealand Music Month, which is a really big national celebration of New Zealand music and the people who make it, and that's run by the Music Commission. And I mention that because normally there's 1,000 gigs that happen every May. Gigs, events, things in libraries, things in schools. It's a very sort of broad promotional campaign, and we had to change every single thing, every last thing that we'd normally do in May, everything we had planned. It was actually the 20th anniversary, so we had a lot planned for this day. We had to just change it all. We had to look at how can we do this online, how can we do this with no audiences, how can we do this with digital delivery of resources. And it made us look at things through a different lens, look at the way that we can work differently. And now we're actually starting to bring some of that forward into the things that we're going to do on a regular basis. And I think that in some degree is true right across the music sector. People have figured out how to do things kind of differently, talk to their audiences differently. And now we're sort of transitioning that into what we're going to do on a day-to-day basis. Excuse me. Which is, I swear, just cold.
Good technique, though.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. We've had a lot of practice. But I think the situation that we're in now is, from a government perspective, they had a 3-step plan, particularly around the arts area, but it does transcend through all of government, which is, the recovery, and then the response to the situation in New Zealand, and then the regeneration. So they see as a government that we should try and take what opportunities and what learnings that came about through this really terrible pandemic. It's cost a lot of people, a lot of things. We're in a good place, but there's still a huge amount of unemployment that's going to result from it. There are going to be a lot of challenges that continue to roll on. However, the government want to look at what we can take from the last few months and bring that forward into regeneration. They're very keen for us to be thinking differently and thinking this as an opportunity to kind of reset the arts environment as opposed to just trying to survive all the time. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out over the next few months. The government has made some significant investment, particularly in music, but right across the arts sector as well, to try and really encourage that sort of regeneration as opposed to just making it back over the line again.
There's a couple of questions coming through. Stacey, I'm not sure if that means summer 2021, but perhaps, because sorry. So yes, Stacey's asking, this is perhaps for Mark, whether how confident you are about shows and festivals that are scheduled actually happening in summer 2021.
I think most of them will go ahead, but it's what shape that they'll take. I think we've been really lucky in that, unless there's a huge second wave, which of course can happen. Most of those festivals will go ahead. It's just who's going to play, and I think that's going to be the really interesting thing. Is who's going to bet that 50 Cent's going to get in the country in January, and who's going to stick with Fat Freddy's drop. And there is no uniformity across that approach yet. But I think, especially after what's happened in the last in the last week or so, especially looking in Victoria, I'm less and less confident about that Australian border opening. But obviously things can move quickly. But Stacey, I think they will go ahead. I think that we're going to see a lot of chop and change on lineups. But I think the show volume is going to be way down. I think a lot of our forecasts for just the amount of stuff we're going to promote is going to be way down, and that's the same of every promoter, because there's only so many times the New Zealand band can play, and of course they want to retain their value. Teresa, and now you can speak about this further, but you don't want to go out there and push your act too many times, because this is one thing, the conversations we're getting into with managers and agents here is, it's not just about this coming summer. This is a great chance to position artists in a premium space as headliners. They're going to have opportunity to close stages that maybe wasn't there before. But a lot of that good work you can get from that is going to be ruined if you then go and play, the town hall 6 times this summer and totally thrash the audience. So by the time next summer comes around, everyone's just like, hey, you're that band that took the money or whatever, So there's a real balance there. Starting to be a factor in people's planning, and that's people saying that to us. That's not us going to them. So be interesting to see how that kind of plays out over the rest of summer.
Millie Milgate, hello Millie, has asked, do you think that reluctance from older generations will impact certain genres, and will venues and programmers book with this in mind?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And hi Millie, it's been a while. I absolutely believe that this is going to affect different genres, different demos differently, and of course the market will react to that. We're going to see a couple of things go up and go really well. Then you're going to see a couple of things go up and not do very well. And that's going to have a huge knock-on effect as we go further. And I don't know if people right now are thinking, I'm not going to book for over 40s or over 50s, but, I think, you only have to see the reaction of some of the organisations like the NZSO and Opera, who have very quickly figured out that their audience is going to be far more reluctant to sit in a room with 2,000 people versus the next drum and bass gig at Shed 6 in Wellington. It's a very different set of circumstances, and thus the approaches are very different.
There's a bunch of questions coming in. I might just come back to that in a little bit. I guess one of the things I'm really curious about is there's a lot of positive talk here, and in the scheme of things, and I'm sort of interested by what you guys think with New Zealand being a smaller country, having a government that oversees the whole country, and not having the kind of clash of having state governments and then federal governments, and so how much some of the positive steps are down to some of the sort of fortunate nature of it being isolated and smaller and all these different things in terms of the structure of the country, and how much is down to sort of some really like great steps taken by the government, by the industry, by you three that are talking today. Like, how do you sort of see that balance, and does it feel like it's just a fortunate setup, or are you really proud of what has happened in kind of this period of time since mid-March? Teresa, what are your thoughts on that?
Completely proud. I think we're extremely lucky to have Jacinda as our PM, and the Labor government, and all the steps that they took to around lockdown, and all the steps they're taking for the recovery of the arts. And definitely we benefited from being, isolated and taking learnings from what was happening overseas. But without a doubt, our government has been amazing. And being able to, and then also within the industry, I think we're extremely lucky that all the agencies and all the people within the industry are really open, and the immediate call was made once we knew we were going to lockdown for all the heads of the agencies and organisations to meet on a regular basis, and everyone was immediately agreed, and all the conversations were very open and continue to be open. We continue to meet. So yes, I'm extremely proud of our government and our industry, and feeling very grateful actually that we're in New Zealand.
Cath, how do you see that kind of balance between sort of actions taken and some of the elements that certainly make New Zealand more fortunate than a country that's landlocked in Europe?
Yeah, I think that the response overall was it was very pragmatic. It was very sort of science-based, and I think they took a very human response at the core of things. So before we entered lockdowns, in that week leading up to the pandemic being announced, we were getting really worried about crew in particular from shows that might have been cancelled, and as I mentioned before, venues. When I spoke to the Ministry for Culture and Heritage, they were like, this is a concern, and yes, we want to have a look at this, but we're going to deal with people first, and then we'll get to businesses, and then we'll get to infrastructure. And that was the way that the Prime Minister led the country to respond. People first, then businesses, then look at the overall infrastructure, and that's continued to be the kind of basis. So I think that overall, we definitely had some luck. We definitely had some great knowledge that we could gain from other similar nations, particularly around the Asia region. But the way that the industry worked together is how we've ended up in a position where we can think about regeneration. So all the information that I've been talking about is sort of constantly feeding up to government. None of that would have been possible if it wasn't for all of the industry organisations coming together, working together, and getting those kind of key messages and looking at what is the most important thing. So we're fortunate that it's a very sort of collegial industry, But you know, we all have the different things that we are focused and concerned about, but I think overall we did a really good job of coming together and looking at overall what are the key needs right now, what do we need to try and assist. So I'm very grateful for my colleagues and peers in the music industry and the way everyone worked together.
Mark, you've had probably one of the better positions to get a sense of what's happening in each country with all of your Live Nation global team meetings. What do you think, what lessons could be sort of applied from some of the more, you know, from what New Zealand has done and how the industry's reacted to other countries, do you think?
The best example was, you know, last Wednesday, I was on one of the calls and talking to a guy called Bruce Moran, who runs the entire South America division for Live Nation. And he was like, oh, look, you know, I was like, we're announcing these Benny arena runs. And he was just like, you're announcing an arena run. I was like, yeah. And he goes, you know, I'm in Rio right now. We don't even have law and order. The police have stopped showing up to work. And he wasn't kidding. And you're just like, wow. And so for me, that was kind of like put in perspective that I'm sitting here in an argument with, you know, Ticketek or Ticketmaster over a $1.20 credit card charge. And one of my peers in the other country is trying to figure out how to get 75 people from their homes to the office without, you know, Armageddon getting in the way. So it's given a lot of perspective on how lucky we are here. Even in Australia, where it's not at the same level as New Zealand, society is still functioning, people are safe, and we're all in a position where we can actually plan what's going ahead. The one thing that's come out of the States is that there is no cohesive plan. There is no cohesive overarching viewpoint on where this is going to go. In the UK, it seems to be a lot more organized, I guess, across the different industries. There seems to be a much more solid timeline, who's going to do what, how they're going to do it. Live Nation's doing this, AEG is going to take care of this bit, you know, and DF Concerts are doing this bit in Scotland, etc. But, you know, I think that's kind of one of the main things that I've seen is just how fortunate we are, and reiterating what Teresa and Cath have said and what I've seen in Australia as well. It's how lucky we are to have those institutions that have stepped in as quickly as they did and achieved kind of what they have, because, you know, there's absolutely no doubt they're in the top % of markets right now, top 1%, you know. We saw a crazy stat the other day. For the first time ever, Ticketmaster New Zealand was the highest selling Ticketmaster territory in the world. That's never happened. We've never been in the top 20. And it was because no one else is selling any tickets, and Justin, who runs Ticketmaster, had a really good day because he had three rugby stadium shows go on sale and an arena tour, and he did 70,000 tickets and he took #1. So like things like that just keep putting in perspective for us, at least, that it's an incredibly fortunate position we find ourselves in. It's something I keep telling the staff here and everyone who complains that it's hard to, because there's less flights, so it's going to cost $300 a head as opposed to $250 to get, you know, that band from Christchurch to Dunedin. And I'm just like, well, at least we're not dodging people with pitchforks on the highway on the way to the airport, you know?
Yeah, it's sorry, I just actually lost the old train of thought, so I'm going to continue on. But what do you think? Like, Cath, what do you think's unique about New Zealand and the New Zealand music industry that has sort of made that difference between, like, what are sort of the specific things that kind of are different to other places that have sort of maybe helped change some of these outcomes?
I think it's really back to what I said before, that kind of collegiality. We do have a lot of organisations, and we all have different specific focus. So I think there are lots of people who have quite specific areas of expertise. So it means you can kind of give good information. But absolutely, the fact that our arts ministers are interested in music, you know, that's probably the thing that's made the biggest difference. Things will change as far as music funding goes in New Zealand. I think things will change as far as all arts funding goes. But one thing we have is a really, really significant investment. So to answer a question from Henry in the chat there, it's about $35 a head that's been invested in the arts as part of the arts recovery package. That's about 175 million so far. And I say so far because it's not necessarily finished yet. And that's just the arts funding as well. There is also the support for general businesses, and there is a lot of work which is still happening with the larger events and promoters and venues, working with the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. So there's a few different things that are still happening there, and we're yet to see the fullness of the broadcasting response as well. So there is really significant investment already, and I understand there will be more. At what scale, I don't actually know yet, but it's going to make a big difference going forward. And that investment isn't just in helping people's companies survive, it's actually in looking to the future. So some of the things that the Music Commission is going to be working on is a domestic touring program to support people to be able to tour nationally, especially when a lot of our artists, relied on offshore touring income to survive previously. And we're doing some work to get some money out to music venues, which will hopefully happen in the next week. We're doing some work with outward sound recipients, and also with people who had invested money to do shows in the New Zealand Music Month project I talked about earlier. So there's lots of different parts. New Zealand On Air will also be looking at much greater investment in the recording of music and creating music. So there will be, I think, a roll-on effect that hopefully over the course of a year will put us in an even stronger position than where we were going into the pandemic.
Yeah.
Long answer. I'm giving you the longest answers in the world. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. I think that perhaps speaks to Craig's question about whether the agencies will change criteria and focus a bit more towards domestic tours. So you're saying effectively that's yeah. Craig is saying yes, thanks.
Yeah,
quite a funny process to speak to people that then respond on text.
I should say that. I mean, that program's hopefully going to come into effect around August. The Aotearoa touring program, and there'll be sort of different parts to it that are being workshopped and negotiated at the moment. But on the other side of it, with our Outward Sound program, we have changed focus. So people can still apply for international grants, but they're all focused on marketing. We've got something like 16 New Zealand records came out internationally in May, and they can't be toured to support and promoted. So how are we going to make sure they're not wasted investments by New Zealand artists? So helping to market them overseas is what we're looking at the moment.
Henry's question is interesting here, and with regards over what period and how many phases is the New Zealand government support being rolled out, and are there any issues with red tape that you've had to overcome? Because it seems like that's been pretty good with the wage subsidy, access and how quickly it's come through, and then some of the other grant funding opportunities and certainly some of the Outward Sound New Zealand Music Commission changes have been really positive for a newer act like Mirko I manage. So yeah, like it seems good, but obviously behind the scenes there can be a lot more red tape than you think. Maybe Teresa, do you want to sort of speak to some of that? Are you across some of those things enough, or should this be a Cath question?
I can actually talk about, it probably is more of a Cath question, but I would like to talk about just actually how easy, as a manager applying getting your artists to apply, how easy all of the funding was. Like the wage grant was super easy. Creative New Zealand also did a wage subsidy top up, which was, and so you had to have received the wage grant to be able to apply for this grant. And that was really, really easy to apply for. The Music Helps support was really easy to apply for. So, and that has been fantastic as well. Like at a time when we were in lockdown and people were nervous about what's happening with their career and their livelihood, it was just great that you didn't have to wade through a whole lot of paperwork in order to get this help.
Yeah, I had a funny scenario with Marlon being like, I could have done that for him. Which was sort of he was almost annoyed that we'd done the form for him, because he felt like that was one he could definitely have covered. It was a very straightforward form. Yeah, that certainly seems like, someone who manages 2 New Zealand artists, it seems like a feature that it's been pretty straightforward and very quick in terms of the money coming through. And I talked to a bunch of musicians who spoke about how great it was to apply for something and receive it within 3 to 4 days, and just how much comfort that brought, especially since it was a healthy chunk of money.
And also the new phase of the wage subsidy is immediate by the looks of it. Everyone that I know that has applied for it has got that day.
Wow. Yeah, which I guess collectively, if you combine the initial wage subsidy, the Creative New Zealand addition to it, and then the new one, assuming the new one's also $7,000, is that the case?
It's for 8 weeks as opposed to 12.
Okay, so it's sort of roughly a total of what, like about
it's about
15 grand total,
4,
maybe.
No, it's
but between the three of those, like maybe that's all nearly, could be nearly like roughly 15 grand or something. So because it's like 7 plus 4 plus 4. So so like it's quite a significant chunk of money to sort of survive the rest of the year, isn't it? If you need to bunker down or help, like it's certainly a big contribution.
But I guess there's a lot of people who couldn't make a living. They couldn't go out and work and play shows. And playing shows is absolutely, in a market the size of New Zealand, a really important income stream. So if venues are closed and you can't monetize your online performances, which some people did, but far more often they were free shows, having that kind of financial wherewithal hopefully will make a big difference to artists being able to create art for the rest of the year.
The Matt's here talking about this travel bubble, and obviously that's such a kind of tangible conversation at the moment, something everyone's hoping for. Like Mark, do you want to start talking about that? And like Matt's saying, what would New Zealand industry want from the Australian counterparts? I'll see if there's anything else on that here, but Mark, do you want to speak a little bit about that travel bubble and what that will kind of how that will be different from New Zealand being afloat, but just with domestic touring?
Obviously, a travel bubble opens up a massive market for New Zealand acts, and a solid market for Australian acts to come into New Zealand. Our conversations with Australian agents, we're down the line on a lot of offers. We've got some stuff confirmed, but just not announced yet. Usually some of these acts would come in and just do Auckland or Auckland Wellington, but we're now Auckland Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin, Tauranga, Nelson, Napier. The scale of these tours are considerably bigger. Having a bubble, it just means for promoters here, having access to their Australian talent is vital if we're going to get through to the end of summer. And having that Australian market open to bands like, say, for example, Mako Road, with their promoter in Australia, we've got, a bunch of shows on sale, plus a whole bunch of more shows that we want to announce because they've already sold out all their East Coast dates, is a huge part of their planning for 2020. So, for international acts coming in, if there's an open bubble, Trans-Tasman means they can do a 14-day isolation in either, Perth or Wellington, and then basically step between the two territories. That means it's a lot more viable, especially for small tour party acts like comedians, especially DJs, where it's 1, 2, 3 people. They can come in and do the 14 days and then potentially do 12 shows or 12 arena shows, depending on the act. And that's worth it, because they're not playing anywhere else. That's the kind of key thing to remember. We're pretty far down the line we have a hip hop artist playing here in November, where Live Nation's promoter in New Zealand and another promoter's another outfit's the promoter in Australia. And we're very far down the line trying to figure out how isolation would work. Come into Wellington for 14 days, do the Auckland Wellington League, then go on to Australia. I saw Alice's question here on how the cost.
Yeah. I'm trying to decipher it while still listening.
It's really simple. And hi, Alice. We've just basically presented a budget on what it's going to cost. Firstly, they're reduce their tour party from 37 to 10. And they'll pick up all local crew, which is great news for New Zealand and Australia crew people who need the work. And then we would just take that isolation cost. We figured out what it is and we divided it by the amount of shows. And it became each of those shows' problem to basically contribute to meet that cost. How that cost gets met going forward, Alice, I don't know. Like, that's crystal ball. That'll be individual, but we would assume it's a tour cost that gets factored in the same as other costs, whether it be comes under ground costs or whatever. But you know, it has to be met. And one thing I've been really impressed with from everyone's side is that everyone's kind of clicked that we're all going to have to contribute to make this work again. So there hasn't been any lopsided conversations from anyone yet on how this is going to go forward. At least that I'm part of anyway. Yeah.
I was going to say, in New Zealand at the moment, I mean, we have a distinction between quarantine and isolation. You know, quarantine is you are, you know, pretty much shut in a hotel room and you cannot leave that room. Currently, the New Zealand government is covering the cost of the 14-day quarantine for people who enter the New Zealand borders. Almost all of these people are returning New Zealanders. You know, international law states you cannot let your citizen be stranded, you have to let them in. But that could change over time, and I know the government over the next fortnight are considering whether it could be a cost sharing or a full cost being put on to the person entering the country. That cost of quarantine. The way the government's looking at the moment is that the huge hotel bill that they will be covering for this month is nothing compared to the cost of locking down the economy again. So that's where we are at the moment in New Zealand.
I guess it probably won't apply for Mark's act coming over to Pleasure.
Yeah, I'm not anticipating to pick up.
It'll be a bold move though.
Yeah,
you know, like
rappers in Wellington and yeah.
Teresa, running a festival, like it's, you know, that's an idea that I'd had in New Zealand that Mark and I had talked about before, and you know, you sort of at this time I'm just like, oh, that seems like such a demoralizing concept to like be running a festival. How do you feel in that position? Do you feel like buoyant about the future of that? Like what's your mood with thinking about things like running a festival?
Milk and Honey is very New Zealand based anyway. We've only ever had New Zealand. We've only been going for 2 years, and we've only had New Zealand artists on there. And International Women's Day is in March of next year. So I think that we should be, fingers crossed. Okay.
Yeah. So it sort of hasn't. I guess that's the interesting part of this for us as an industry, is like how this impacts just general kind of like looking forward and motivation and things. Like, have you managed to sort of keep a good level of motivation throughout this time, Teresa?
I have actually, but mainly just because I was super busy. And I must admit, I did have a hint of jealousy for a whole lot of my friends who had basically a paid holiday. And I think it gave me this weird insight into why my parents have this routine as they retired, because when you're in this confined space, when you're in your house for a matter of weeks, it does turn into a little bit of Groundhog Day. And so, you know, I made sure I was able to go out there and do that hour's walk that we're allowed to do, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think that collectively, like I know that Mark and Cath were the same. We were just so busy that it actually got us through the pandemic. And also what the MMF focused on during that time to keep up our members' motivation is that we really wrapped around our members and did a lot of support. And we you know, immediately deferred all recurring members' fees because we just thought they, you know, may not be able to afford it. We did a whole lot of mentors hangouts. We did managers hangouts. We worked with the rest of the industry to do industry seminars so that we were informing the industry as a whole as to what was happening behind the scenes. We did things like radio programmers, seminars, and then also through Music Month, we held the summit in conjunction with the Music Commission. So we just really had a big focus on just informing as well as supporting as well, because I think that's when people do get a bit panicky when they just don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, like I'm hoping I'm not gonna like Katie. How are we for time?
Happy for you guys to keep going for a bit longer.
Because I don't want to sort of end things on a negative note, but I guess I just feel like maybe there's a few sort of you know, constructive critiques of some of the things that have happened that we haven't sort of got into. I'm sure it's not been perfect, and it's always interesting to learn from things that could have been done differently. Like, is there some takeaways where you're like, oh, you would do a few things a bit differently, or you'd ask for different things from the government? Like, Cath, how do you feel about that?
Because we're kind of in the midst of the rollout, it I don't think we're at the point yet of having enough distance to look back and think you could have done things differently. I mean, there definitely will be, and there definitely will, there's always things that can be improved. I actually find that quite a difficult question, because so much of it has been chance, fate, and things that you can't control. And that's been a huge part of the last 3 months, and also looking forward. It's like, we're trying to plan for things like the Going Global Music Summit, which is our normally our internationally focused conference, which happens in September. We're looking at when we're going to be getting artists back touring throughout with sound, and all of these things are going to depend on what's happening in the world. You've got no control over them. So if I could change one thing, I would like us to have more control over what's happening, and that would make life easier. I mean, at the moment, everything is doing like a 3-scenario plan. If we continue in level 1, it's going to look like this. If we've got a trans-Tasman bubble, it's going to look like that. If we're back at restrictions on gatherings, or worst case scenario lockdown, then what will it look like then? So there will be things that we wish we did differently, but we're probably too much in the midst at the moment, in my specific area anyway, to know what that is.
And maybe you can just action whatever you feel should be done. Like, that's probably what it's just the next thing to work on.
You'd hope, man.
Mark, how do you feel about that in terms of just from those kind of the early stages? Are you like, oh, geez, if we face that again, we'd do it differently?
No, I don't think we'd change anything differently. Obviously, there's a few things we'd like to be kind of less stressful, but like to go back and hug myself 60 days ago and go, it's going to be okay. But besides that, and buying all that hand sanitizer that I never managed to sell. I think the main thing is like, it's great what we're going through, but I guess we're in a slightly different position at LN, and I know Frontier must be in the same one with AEG, where because we're the first markets open, there's a lot of eyes on us and a lot of pressure there to deliver. I know there's a lot of people around the world who didn't even know we had a New Zealand office, who are now very, very, very curious to see how our results are going, and we're now giving stuff back to the States and Europe on, this is how this on sale's gone, this is how this negotiation went, including this is what the government's doing here, all that kind of stuff. But, I don't think we've taken any drastic missteps. If anything, it's kind of highlighted some of the good decisions that have been made as an industry over the last few years, and also kind of reflected that the music industry, at least the live side in New Zealand over the last 3-4 years, has actually gone through a massive boom. And this kind of highlighted it, because a lot of the kind of key companies on the live side, whether it's LN, Frontier, Ticketek, TEG, etc., are now run in New Zealand, and that was never the case before. And that's been a huge advantage over this period, because decisions got made quickly. There was no, I need to go back to Sydney and ask, or I need to go back to Melbourne and check in on that. Things were done on the fly, decisions made in the room, and that was a huge advantage. And that was kind of one of the things that really came about. That, and the fact that we could really use some kind of LPA type set up in New Zealand, but that's already in the works. So yeah.
Adam's asked a question here that is, there are discussions about finding different ways to help remunerate artists, partly given that the system's kind of broken anyway. Are there similar discussions in New Zealand, or are things more returning to what they have been? Teresa, what are your thoughts on that?
There haven't, as far as I'm aware, I haven't been involved in any discussions around that, but it is a really good point, and something that is definitely worth looking at for sure.
Yeah, it seems to me like New Zealand, it's been a short enough sort of impact period that everyone's back in that headspace of putting on the same shows and touring, maybe just entering more markets, as you said, Mark, rather than changing the way you tour. Whereas it's been interesting in Australia to sort of see these major shows being put on with, you know, people drive-in shows, and it doesn't seem like New Zealand's even thought about drive-in shows, because
we didn't have to do them. Thankfully, we looked at it, and luckily we had opened up enough that we didn't have to do it, because like, who could be, you know, this is hard enough as it is without putting 300 cars at Waikaraka Park on a Tuesday night, you know. So we were lucky that we managed to. We were like the country that skipped that bit, which was great. Yeah.
Sarah's got a question here about how the fan response has been to tours you've announced. Has there been much change in consumer behaviour? Does it seem that people are just as keen to go to events as they were before?
In some cases more keen, but I think we're absolutely in a glow at the moment as people have come out of lockdown. Also, you know, the financial effects of the current situation haven't really sunk in for a lot of people. So I wouldn't judge any fan behaviour on what's happened over the last few weeks. I would wait until September to really answer what that question is, I'm afraid. So right now, I think it's just too early to call it.
And Henry's asked for probably what could be a nice closing crystal ball question. When the borders are going to reopen, and for touring from our key markets of the US, UK, Europe, is 2021 even a realistic starting point? I guess, Mark, you've definitely got an interesting take, considering how much money is at stake amongst the sort of global Live Nation conversation. Everyone's opinion in those conversations, they must be getting the best possible information given how much money is at stake.
But the answer is we can't open. That international touring circuit won't open in a major way until the States opens, until Europe opens. And when they do, there's going to be a lot of pressure for those amphitheaters in the States and arenas in Europe to get first dib at a lot of stuff. And that's kind of one, I wouldn't say it's locked in yet, but that's a serious concern for the live side here. I was talking to the guy who runs Frontier about it the other day, that it's one thing for the market to open, it's the other thing for us to get Kendrick Lamar to come and do, 9 cities, because every city in the world is going to want Kendrick Lamar to go play. So that's something we need to work through. Luckily, it's something we have started working through at LN, but just because the borders are open also doesn't mean that the artists won't come. We've had a couple of artists who are over 65 years of age cancel tours and say they're just not coming. Like, we're not rescheduling. They're just not going to do it. So there's a lot of stuff that still needs to be played out. But to end on a positive note, I'm bullish that the industry, that we will genuinely get through this. We're going to get through this year, and we'll get through next year, and maybe 2023 before we get back to any kind of level of business where we were in 2018. But, that's the way it is, and that's a lot more positive than I was 2-3 months ago.
Cath, have you had conversations with sort of your network that are more international, and got a sense of what everyone else thinks about when things could go back, and based on the information they're getting from their government contacts?
People are thinking end of this year, beginning of next year, but I think one of the things that we're focused on is changing our key markets. Asia is going to open far more quickly than USA and UK. We've been, Australia to a large degree, hugely focused on US, UK and Europe for music export for years now. So rather than thinking about when our key markets are going to open, it's more about thinking how we're going to change our key markets to the places that will be available to New Zealand artists. And when the whole world comes back online again in a year or two, then we'll just have a bigger world to tour.
Goody. Yeah, it'll be both good and bad to start touring all the way through, trying to schedule tours all the way through Asia as well.
Hey, Alistair, boo-hoo.
Yeah. I guess it certainly, if it doesn't include Europe and North America two, it might not be such a tricky routing to put together. But Teresa, what about the MMF kind of the management bodies around the world that you've connected with? Have they kind of been crystal ball gazing as well? And have you had any of those conversations?
No, they haven't been crystal ball gazing at all, because it's just such the unknown, really. But I just completely agree with Cath. You know, there's been a lot of focus on hopefully the Trans-Tasman bubble opening and opportunities that can come out of that, like tour sharing. That New Zealanders can jump on Australian tours and Australian artists can jump on New Zealand tours. And, you know, the Asia market is definitely one that people are looking to as well.
Yeah, that seems like a great couple of things to sort of continue talking about in the coming months. Obviously these new focus markets and the idea of tour swaps and just the Australia-New Zealand relationship closing and getting closer would be a really great thing to come out of this, for sure. I gather that is probably a good time to finish up. Correct, Katie?
Sure, we can end it there. That was such a fantastic panel. Thank you all for your amazing contributions today. I got so much out of that. I hope everyone did as well. So a little bit of information from the VMDO side about a few things to keep an eye out for. So you may have come into contact with some information around Music Victoria memberships currently being free through to the end of financial year. So we've got under a week to go there. That's an amazing opportunity to sign up as a member if you head to musicvictoria.com.au and the registration form is all there for you. We also recently developed a COVID-19 guidance note for live music venues in conjunction with Music Victoria. And that's taking into consideration the hospitality guidelines and the Creative Victoria guidelines combined to guide music venues around ways that they can reopen in a COVID-safe way. So if that applies to you, have a look. And that's also a useful resource for music industry and artists, as well as the venues that will use that guidance note to develop their own plans when they reopen. We've got a couple of workshops coming up in July, two with Diversity Arts Australia, which you can check out on our website, one coming up next week and one a fortnight after that. So that's an ongoing series that we've developed with them. So thank you again to the panel. For those of you who'd like to stick around and do some more networking, we would definitely love you to do so. So you're going to get another invitation popping up on your screen to join a breakout room. So feel free to accept and have a chat with your peers, and we will see you all again next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Ngā mihi nui.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.